Hello everyone, this is update for December 2nd, 2024, day 1013 of the war, and of the date update. Also catch up for December 1st, November 30th and 29th. So I'm going to be very brief in terms of general updates, and I'm going to switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. So first is the conflict in Syria, where essentially Assad regime forces were struck by pro-Turkish rebels, essentially, and the collapse was catastrophic. One of the reasons why it was so catastrophic is because because first of all, the Assad regime is completely relying on support of Russia and Iran, and the problem with Russia is that they pulled most of their land forces to the war battlefield in Ukraine. So there were very little sort of infantry on the ground, completely close to zero. So that's one part. And then similar situation with Iran, where Hezbollah is essentially beheaded, or the command and control system severely damaged there. They still fairly engaged in war with Israel in Lebanon, so they cannot really pull and turn around and provide meaningful support. And so that really would explain this quick, I would say, catastrophic collapse for Assad regime, and also catastrophic situation development for Russia and Iran. So that's sort of on the let's say negative for this sort of axis. There's also positive developments for this axis. So the government of Chad, that's another country in Central Africa, they sent a letter to, I think, French government, stating that they want French troops out of their country, and that's really probably first step before the country will move under essentially protectorate of Russia, similar to what's going on in Mali, Burkina Faso, and so on. So essentially, Russia continues to gain control and expand its control in Central Africa, and the main reason is obviously control over natural resources, because Russia is significant owner of natural resources, and if they able also to cut off West from the natural resources from Africa, that's really increasing their economic power and basically monopoly power in the markets, and that's a weapon on its own, essentially, and that's really the strategy there. And so far, it's actually working, and let's say relatively well for Russia there. Now I'm going to switch to a situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. In terms of sort of major strategic development, there is not really much going on. I think the Ukrainian president is realizing that the situation on the battlefield is moving towards collapse for Ukraine, and so he's trying to figure out how. Apparently, he's more open to peace negotiations. So we'll see what happens there. That's, I would say, open question, because, as I mentioned before, situation is very, I would say, very negative for Ukraine at this point, because Russia is clearly winning. They have, military-wise, they have no reason to stop. As I mentioned in a prior video, the only reason, in one of the prior videos, the only reason is economic reason. But at the same time, Russian political ruling class fully aware that sanctions are not going to be fully lifted, so they also understand that there's not really much sort of upside there, because partial lift of the sanctions doesn't really solve the problem, and that's at the same time they're losing sort of something that essentially they sink in their pocket. And the other point here is that from territorial perspective, Russia needs really to control at least the eastern side of Dnipro River at the minimum, and really they want to control all of the Ukraine, and if or most of the Ukraine, maybe with exception of just the western part of Ukraine. So the situation is completely in flux. Hard to predict anything in any reasonable way. Now I'm gonna do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north, and gonna jump into the situation in the Kursk region of Russia. Situation is somewhat was stable over past 3 or 4 days, meaning Ukrainian forces did not lose new territories there, but at the same time, the overall situation is moving in that direction. That Ukraine is losing control of this bridgehead in the Kursk region. Now let's move to the situation north and northeast of Kharkiv. Things more or less quiet. Nothing really major is going on here. Next, let's move to the situation on the North Lugansk section of the front line. Things here so far were somewhat stable and that means without major territorial losses. So Russian troops always gaining ground, 100 to 200 meters here and there, but the biggest sort of problem which is sort of at this point is normal, and I would say is expected given where Ukrainian army is in terms of all of the problems that I discussed in prior videos. That's already sort of, I would say, great situation that there is no major Russian breakthrough or major Ukrainian territorial losses. Otherwise, sort of normal small losses are, I would say, at this stage in the war are expected. Otherwise, as I stated, situation more or less stable here. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line, and the northern part is more or less quiet. And one of the main reasons is both sides don't have enough resources, and in this case, it's mostly just a question of Russia. They already, I would say, relatively overstretched everywhere. Then situation a little bit south remains more or less the same. There's fighting going on for this brick factory in Chasiv Yar, which will be very crucial. If Ukrainian forces lose it, then the whole front line here is more or less going to collapse. That means the real loss, which is Chasiv Yar, which is going to be immediate result, and really means Ukrainian defensive line will really going to be around Konstantinivka. So the next sort of stop for Ukrainian forces is going to be Konstantinivka if this factory is going to get lost. And I would say more or less it's probably going to happen. It's just question of time at this point. Now let's move to central Donbass front line, where situation is developing into, let's say, more and more catastrophic as every day, but it's, I would say, slow motion catastrophe. So the northern part that's facing east of Pokrovsk is somewhat stable, and Ukrainian forces there holding the line in fairly reasonable fashion. Where the problems are sort of all the way west, I would say, along this road from Selidove to Pokrovsk, this E50 here, and then all the way south. That's where the Ukrainian defensive line is crumbling. The situation around Kharkiv remains more or less the same, stable. So Ukraine, and by stable, what it really means is Ukrainian forces are slowly but surely losing Kharkiv, the town itself, and I would say they close the whole town is close to be lost. But the main sort of defensive asset there is actually not the town itself, but the power plant, which is pretty large power plant on the western side of the town, and that's probably where Ukrainian forces will attempt to hold on as long as possible. But otherwise, it's already foregone conclusion that this whole area around Kurakhove, Dachne, all of this Uspenica, this is going to be lost. It's just rear guard fights to sort of slow down Russian advance and make sure Russia pays as high a cost as possible for capturing this land. Otherwise, that's sort of writing on the wall there. The other big problem for Ukrainian forces is that Russian troops managed to move southwest and south of Rozdolne and capture a village called Novy Komar. And essentially, at this point, Velyka Novosilka is lost. It's just again question of time. How quickly it's going to be lost, but it's semi-encircled and is in essentially undefendable position. Which, again, with loss of Kurakhove, Velyka Novosilka, this the whole defensive line in this whole area becoming essentially destroyed. There's not much to hold on to the west. It's all mostly relatively small villages and fields, and there's not that many defensive lines here, so the advance by Russian troops probably will accelerate there. But let's just look into let's zoom in a little bit and see a little bit in detail. So this is the situation around Pokrovsk. I mentioned in prior video that Russian troops captured this village Zhovte, and now they are advancing and they are attempting. The target is this village Shevchenko. So that's at this point main goal there. The other Russian group captured the village Pushkine here, so you can see, and they are advancing and towards Ukrainka here. So that's what I mentioned, that that the front line here is absolutely not stable, and I would say collapsing, but in slow motion. This is how it looked on November 28th, just for for comparison purposes. And at the same time, situation south from Zarya to Stariterny, somewhat stable. Doesn't mean that this is, say, permanent stability. It's just, as I mentioned before, temporary reprieve. Now, this is a situation around this Velyka Novosilka. So this is Velyka Novosilka itself. And so Russian troops first captured this village Rozdolne, and then they attacked and actually managed to find a hole in Ukrainian defenses and captured village Novy Komar, and now they basically turned south and attacking this Velyka Novosilka from the north and also from the east and southeast. So as you can see, it's essentially the village is turned into basically bridgehead on the eastern side of this stream. In long run, it's not defendable situation, so most likely Ukrainian forces simply will retreat on the western side of this stream. And essentially, another important stronghold of Ukrainian defenses in this area is lost. Now let's look at the situation along the Zaporizhya front line, and things here are more or less quiet. And then by that I mean everything sort of most west of the Velyka Novosilka, essentially. Now let's finish with the last section of the front line, which is along the Dnipro River, and things here also quiet as well. That's all for the day. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.